to episode 8 of Matire Gemi, a bi-weekly podcast where we help you learn about your Agîkûyû culture, history, and heritage in English and in a fun, light-hearted way. I'm Njeri Diho, your anchor, and I'm here with Waiyaki, your cultural enthusiast who continues to immerse himself in learning the ways of our ancestors. And today, we're also joined by two really special guests whom I will introduce you to in a little bit. So let me jump in and tell you what we'll cover in today's episode, because we have some very rich discussions about our ancestral life. So we start with a reading by Kingori about the life of the Agîkûyû society before British rule. And let me tell you this, guys. You will be surprised and you will be in awe once you hear how our ancestors lived before colonization. Get ready. We also have a rich and courageous discussion about the masculine and feminine roles before colonization. So the question is, what were their roles? Like, how did we achieve balance? What did men do? What did women do? And is it similar to what we do today? Let me tell you, what you learn may surprise you. So y'all, I'm super excited. And I'm ready for us to step into this delicious discussion about that history and the first two stages of the Mugikuyu. But before I jump in and close this introduction, let me tell you one thing, guys. This was a really long discussion. So what we did is we broke this podcast into 3 different conversations, and we'll release part 2 and part 3 of this conversation following today. So now, I welcome you to lean back and to leave your mind. And instead, I invite you to listen to this conversation with your body. Listen with your heart and listen with your soul so you can recognize the truth of who we are. Well, welcome to today's special episode. And here with us today is really 2 special guests. But first, of course, we've got Waiyaki. Hi, Waiyaki.
Hi, Njeri. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you. And then we have Kingori Kanyi. And guys,
Hello,
we had
Njeri.
him. Hi. We had him in episode 5. So guys, if you haven't listened to that, go listen to his amazing introduction. He has such fantastic credibility. So welcome, Kingori.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. And then finally, I'd love to introduce you to our newest guest, Ciku. I am so excited to have her here. So I'm going to give you guys a high-level intro into who she is, and then allow her to give you a little bit of an intro. So Ciku actually is a naturopathic doctor. She completed her training in 2009, and she's actually an herbalist as well as a detox acupuncturist, right? She also has been initiated into several African spiritual knowledge systems. This woman knows African traditional systems. And in terms of our Agîkûyû perspective, she's a modomogo. And not just from her, she comes from 3 generations of traditional maternal medicine, which is fantastic. She has completed her dissertation for her PhD, but she hasn't defended it, but she's completed that. And I'm so excited to have you here, Ciku. So welcome, and tell us, more about you in terms of how did you gain all your credibility.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So my knowledge has really come from my grandfather and also from my grandmother. So my grandmother was a nurse midwife. And because she was a nurse midwife, she also would help a lot of women that were giving birth in the community. So she also worked as what would be considered a lay midwife or a traditional midwife.
Nice.
So from that, as a young girl, I would always hear the stories. Whenever a woman is having a difficult time giving birth, this is what you give her. Whenever a woman is having a difficult time and her placenta is not coming out, this is what you do. So, and that really just sparked an interest in me. whenever I could be around elders, I would just always ask questions. We moved to the United States when I was 11, and my thirst for our knowledge just quite honestly continued. Whenever we would go back to Kenya, and whenever I would insist on going back, I would always make sure that I would be around my grandmother and women of my grandmother's age, because they just had a world of knowledge.
I love that you are integrated in that knowledge, but I also remember you saying you've done a lot of deep research about our culture, speaking to people, interviewing them, but also reading written context.
Yes. So, as part of my master's research, which was not on our ways of knowing, it was actually on women's political participation. But because of that, it gave me the ammunition to be able to go to Kenya and speak to a variety of different women about their role in their household. It gave me an opportunity to speak to a lot of elders. And as I was performing these interviews for my research, for my own curiosity, I would ask about how do our political structures work? What is the role of a man? What is the role of a woman? What are the various roles within a man and within a woman?
I love that, Ciku. So welcome. We are so excited to get all this knowledge and context from you and from King Ori and, of course, you, Waiyaki. So as always, what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to kick us off with a power question. And I would love to hear everyone's perspective on this, right? Because when we think about our ancestors before colonialism, we don't have a very positive image of them. And I'm sure you're all going to tell us why. So my question for you guys is, what was the life of a Mugikuyu before British rule? How did our society operate?
Wow, yeah. So I think in order to answer that, let me first start with a few quotes from a book that I think most people those who are interested in Agîkûyû should go check out. It's by a couple called the Rutledges, and it's called the Agîkûyû, with a prehistoric people. That's what it's called, and it's an offensive title, but it's a very interesting book, and I really suggest you go out there and get it. You can find a PDF of it, actually. So let me start by reading a little bit about men.
Okay.
And what these missionaries said they saw in the men of the Agîkûyû.
Okay.
In the disposition, the Agîkûyû are naturally cheerful, merry, and laughter-loving, soon forgetting their troubles and lacking the spirit of vindictiveness. They have a great sense of justice and endorse the infliction of the severest punishment if they know that they are in the wrong. They much dislike and are hurt by the hectoring rudeness of the European, of the damned nigger school of thought and manner. Though shrewd enough in matters of business, they are wanting in the ever-present greediness. The Mugikuyu is by nature extraordinarily honest, bright, intelligent, trustful, and truthful.
Ah, beautiful.
They're polite. They're naturally polite in their intercourse with one another, and a very definite code of good conduct and manners exists. So this is what one of the missionaries who came observed. This is actually part of Raki, in that time today we call it Njeri. They spent 5 years there. And that's some of the things that they said about our men in particular, that this is the way they carry themselves. And so you have to ask yourself, what sort of environment breeds?
But can I also say something? I think Kikuyu women everywhere would be happy to run into this kind of Kikuyu man. Where are they?
This man doesn't exist anymore.
I don't know.
Absolutely. You're right. I mean, I think I think there's been a difference. You're right. Pre-colonial and post-colonial Mugikuyu, there seems to be a very stark difference. So something happened. We lost something that was meaningful at some point, And this is actually what this podcast is about, I believe. It's about looking back and saying, well, in the Gikuyu we say, what do we say, mukara, you know? So where the river left its course. And what we're trying to do is exactly that. See if we can go back and if there's a place where we can retrace those steps and bring the river back in its original course.
Yes.
Right. So I hope that, I know I didn't directly answer your question, how life generally was, but I think I wanted to give that snapshot of that gentlemanly demeanor of the man, because that tells you a lot about the community.
Yes.
If you can find gentlemen,
Yes.
Women usually go way above and beyond that in their demeanor, as we can see in most societies.
I just think that's so beautiful in terms of what you've captured. And I'm going to turn it over to Waiyaki and ask him to answer that same question in terms of how the pre-colonial Mugikuyu was, adding on to what we've had from King Ori.
Yeah, so I'll say I'll talk not from a demeanor perspective, but from what they did. The difference between today and back then is the Mugikuyu used to perform rituals or what is called magogona. So in every stage of life, be it marriage, when a child is born, when a woman gets married or when there's a death, they were rituals. So one of the things that we don't do today, as the Mugikuyu used to do back then, and I think people are trying to bring that back, is magogona. That's really what defines a Mugikuyu. We're talking about the life of a Mugikuyu, but you may not speak Kikuyu today, but if you follow the traditions and do the ceremonies, the magogona, you're being a Mugikuyu.
Yeah.
So, I just wanted to add the spiritual aspect to what King Ori said in terms of what's the difference between today and back then. And, at colonization is when those magogonas were stolen. Not stolen, but sort of demonized or made to look unclean, or the Mugikuyu was robbed of his magogona. In fact, even the Mau Mau used to say, "Where the na magogona maitu." That's what we want. We want freedom, and we want our culture and our rituals. So
I think that's really beautiful, Waiyaki.
Yeah, that's a spiritual aspect I wanted to add on to what King Ori said.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to turn over to you, Ciku, because one of the things I know is that we have been painted for that our ancestors pre-Westernization were backward and primitive. And something in my soul does not believe that. So, Ciku, what's your take, your perspective on the life of the Mugikuyu before colonialism?
So, our life before was vibrant. And it's important to use words that are bright and cheery, because that is who we were. And we were that because we were connected not only to one another, but we were connected to the planet. We were connected to our environment. We were connected to our animals. Everything was connected, right? And that is key to who we are, because we recognize that even when a child is born, as we're going to go over later, you are an individual, but you are also part of a family, which is now your present, but you're also connected to your future, who you're going to be, and you're absolutely connected to your past. And all of that is within an environment in which you live, the earth, right? And the earth was considered an entity, if I can, on its own, and it was something that was absolutely treasured and honored. There were some taboos that you could do that were disrespecting the earth, right? So who we were as a people were a people who were absolutely connected and interconnected with one another.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And I have to tell you, when I hear all this beauty that all of you paint, I can't help, as a woman, ask a really important question, which is the idea of patriarchy. I'd like you guys to tell me how the Agîkûyû viewed genders, right? And the roles of genders and whether one was superior to the other, right? Based on our own truthful way of existence. How was it before colonialism? And one of you jump in.
I'll let Ciku go first. Ladies first.
Well, thank you. So our societies before Europeans came in, and by before Europeans came in, not only before the missionaries, before the explorers, right? Mm-hmm. When we were the ones who were determining how our culture was going to evolve. So this is the time in which I'm talking about. It was understood that this is an interconnection, right? And if at any point the one part of this connectedness is broken, you cease to be together. You cease to be a community.
You cease to be whole.
Exactly. And in such a community, you cannot have oppression. Or if you do, it will break the community. So with that being said, patriarchy is something that, I don't know if you want to use the word evolved or devolved, but it came about later on with a variety of different external influences, right? And I also want to highlight that patriarchy is not the opposite of matriarchy, because I think oftentimes when you have people that are describing a society as patriarchal, and also let me even back up a little bit. So there's patriarchal and there's also patrilineal, right? I don't want to go into like a whole anthropology class, but I think it's important, even as we're using English to describe who we are, that we are very cognizant that our culture is not within the framework of English, right? Mm-hmm. So even as we're describing who we are, it's very much centered on articulating who we are with the understanding that we're using English, right? So Kikuyu, who we are now as a people, I would say, within, quite honestly, like the last 50 years is where I would say that where we are patriarchal, right? There was a shift where I would say we became more patrilineal, meaning how resources were being passed on to one another. Because I think that's a very distinct thing to raise. And we are now more patriarchal, meaning oppressing women because of colonialization, Christianity, and the like.
Wow, that's really powerful, Ciku. And if I can just give a quote I found, and I'm going to put the book. It was a research book, an Oxford book that went into this, and I'm going to put it on the notes, and then you guys can jump in. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to read this, and when I read it, it stunned me, right? And it confirms everything you're saying about patriarchy versus patrilineal, right? That the Agîkûyû were patrilineal, not patriarchal. So here is how it read. English colonial rule of Kenya has played a huge part in the change of the perception of Kikuyu women. Britain, as the majority power in Kenya, projected its gender roles onto its newly acquired territory. They tried engineering a set of ideas about women that compelled them into specific roles with a passivity that belied the highly proactive and transformative nature of women's activities. Which means that the more you read, the colonialists had a definition of what women were. For example, women did not have political power in Europe, in Britain at the time, versus according to the Agîkûyû, women had some level of political power. And I know you guys will cover that later, right? Or in the Western society, a woman's role was purely a childbearer who cooked and cleaned. in the Agîkûyû society, yes, women were childbearers, but that was a power, right? But women were also the ones who had all the power related to producing and distributing, what's it called? Agriculture, right? And that's power, that's political power, right? So you see that some of these gender roles started to be redefined, and we took on the Western definition of patriarchy compared to patrilineal, as you explained it before. What do you guys want to add? Kingori or Waiyaki? What would you like to add?
I think I feel compelled to share another reading because it really floats in, and it's from the same book, on how they viewed women, right? And how these same missionaries saw the position of women. And they say that the stranger passing through the land who sees the women working with bent backs in the fields or toiling along the road with huge loads of firewood obtains little idea of the home life of a Kikuyu woman. And that little is erroneous. The position of such a woman in girlhood, wifehood, motherhood, and in old age is in many ways preferable to that of her white sister.
Wow.
What it loses in breadth of interest, it gains in the increased certainty of the natural joys of home life, and with rare exceptions. This is the sort of thing that they observed in our women. They really envied them. They thought, wow, the girl child in Europe has a raw deal compared to what the girl child born in Kikuyu land has in throughout their whole life.
Wow.
So you're right. These concepts that were brought upon us did not come to improve many things, as you may, our revision now is going to be very clear. And one of those things that they did not improve was the position of women. But to answer generally, I think the framing of matriarchy, that's a very Western framing and discourse. And sometimes we need to step back and just say, you know what, forget about that particular framing. Let's just study our community. What is it that we were about? And just not fall into that trap of trying to make it fit that particular discourse. So I think it would be a much better help and would give us a lot more, and we should be able to unpack a lot more about what we learn if we first set aside that discourse as we understand it today and just ask, how was that community? How was the interplay between the genders? Who was where and what did they do? And what I can tell you right now from my research and my understanding and my experience is that the Mugikuyu woman, the Mugikuyu man, they felt themselves well represented. They felt themselves well understood. There was balance, and everyone understood their place, and everyone was eager to contribute in their own role.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to pass it over to Waiyaki for his opinion as well. But I'm going to tell you something. As you spoke, Kingori, I felt a very strong emotional reaction. And, when Ciku spoke, it's one thing for a woman to say that the Agîkûyû, our ancestors, had balance and that neither was superior to the other. They were both important. There was balance, yin and yang. But to hear a man also articulate that does something to you. And for me, I want to say thank you for articulating that in the recognition that neither role was more important than the other, but both genders were important, both genders had rights, and both genders were valuable, with one not dominating the other. There was balance. And that, Kingori, thank you for sharing that, and Ciku as well, was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So now, what else would you like to add, Waiyaki?
Yeah, I couldn't add anything more as Ciku and Kingori have beautifully put it. But I will say that, colonization was such a huge disruptor because, what happened is you had men, mostly men, Kikuyu men, being taken away from their homes and being put in concentration camps, right? And then jailed for years, and then coming back home and finding their women have children from the home guards. And you can imagine what that psyche, what that did to the psyche of the community.
Yeah.
Which was fueling the patriarchy. That's why King Ori, I've had conversations with King Ori on the side where he'd tell me, men and women, men were usually really angry, like my grandfather was an angry guy sometimes. And I would wonder, why was he so angry? And it's because of the things that happened in that time that even redefined from patriarchy, from patrilineal to a patriarchal system.
Yeah.
So even just, can you imagine how different it was in those 40, 50 years of colonization? The world was a different place before that happened. And that made a huge impact on how Kikuyu men are perceived to be today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and even with what King Ori shared earlier about how men were gentle, right? A gentle man is not an oppressive man. A man is gentle because he's got the perfect balance with him. He doesn't need to be aggressive to contain. There is balance, right? And I'm going to share something that I read, and for me it was also very eye-opening, and it had to do with the Agîkûyû colors. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in. But even in our prayer and in our colors, you see balance in the genders. And this was powerful. I got this from the Agîkûyû Center for Cultural Studies, and he talked about how he had spent more than 10 years on just this one topic. And he talked about the fact that Agîkûyû colors, there were 3 colors. The first color represented was ochre, that reddish brown, and it represents in his exact words, the Agîkûyû essential feminine, the soil, the earth. Then the second color of the Agîkûyû was the blue, and the blue was the inverse of the woman, the sky. And in his word, the sky fertilizes the woman through rain. Balance, right? And then the third color was white, which is, he said, is the life force, the patch of Mount Kenya, Mwene Nyaga, God. So even in our colors, we were so intentional that there was balance. And he showed pictures of these shields called dome. And he says you can't find some of these unless you go to like Sotheby's, because a lot of these were stolen from us. And all of them had balance in these 3 colors. And when you look at it, you realize that neither was over or underrepresented. They had different roles, but there was balance in our community. And that, for a modern woman, is one of the most beautiful things you can hear. So, anything to add?
Let me say one more thing. In all the Kikuyu songs I've heard that describe the relationship of Agîkûyû and Mobi, they always talk about how they loved each other. Oiguano Agîkûyû na Mobi, they always talk about that. They describe it like, I wish our families today would have that oiguano, or that love that they had for each other. Which means, Agîkûyû and Mobi had a model relationship as a man and woman, So any song, if you listen to any songs in Kikuyu that talk about the relationship, you will hear that harmony or yin and yang between them.
Lovely. Ciku, you were going to say something.
Yes, I was going to say that I think when we look at, when we look at our cosmology, right, the way that we saw ourselves within this world and the world and us, right, you can see a variety of different themes that are coming up. So in balance, women are the ones who are the ones who are responsible for taking care of things related to the earth, right? The nurturers. Men are the ones who are the protectors. You cannot have a protector without a nurturer, right? You can, when you have the various systems, which we're going to go talk about, the various stages in life, those various stages, and this is assumed, but I don't think it's highlighted so much, is that those various stages, regardless of your biological sex, the objective was for them to complement one another, right? So at every stage, whether you were male or female, you knew that your counterpart was getting information and was acting in society in a way that was complementing your role, right? Mm-hmm. So as women are being taught, like, okay, well, these are the type of plants and crops that we need. Men are being taught this is how you protect the what is it called? The granary, right? Because we need to protect this. Yes, right? So in every stage, you see how it's complementary, right? Women, we're the ones who take care of certain things. We're the ones who go fetch the water. Water is a feminine quality. Men are the only ones who can bring fire, right? And I mean, a woman could not go get fire, right? So we see, and fire is considered masculine, right? So even with our interaction with the various, products, not products, what's the word? Like
natural resources?
Elements, yes. Elements and natural resources, we can see that there's a balance. Numbers, there's some numbers that are masculine, there's some numbers that are feminine. So the idea that one can be less than that other within our traditional ideologies would be completely foreign, because you can't. It's balance. It's about the complementarity of the two.
Yeah. And our ancestors were smart enough to know this. Kengori, anything else to add on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all begs the question now is, how did they achieve that, right? So, which is what I think we want to get into, is to look into all the different stages of life that a young man or a young woman would go through, and break it down. Maybe that's a little bit of information that our listeners want to hear.
Yeah,
because I think that's very important to break it down for them. Waiyaki had done a great job of setting this up in the last episode.
Yes.
So in the last episode, we talked about the stages of life, and what we really did was to define what each stage was for a boy, and each stage up to when they became an old man, and then define the stages and what they became for each, what a woman became when she grew old. And it was really high level, and that's why we have Ciku and Kingori here to kind of delve deep into each stage and kind of highlight some of the key aspects of each stage and what happened, and maybe go deeper into the philosophy of each stage of Mugikuyu.
All right. So what's the first stage we're starting on Waiyaki before we pass it on to them?
So we'll start at birth. We'll go and start when the child is born and the gametes are said and indicating the sex of the child. So I guess, Kingori, do you want to take it from there on the boy or the girl? Or the child that has been born?
Absolutely. So that first stage, of course, as you had stated in the previous episode, was one that was very unique from the way the Agîkûyû looked at it. And this is that Rokege stage, or an infant stage, after being born and after those gametes have been said, which declare that this child is Mwanawa Kahe or Mwanawa Kairetu. When that declaration is done and those affirmations are made, that child, of course, would be with their mother non-stop throughout that entire stage. And during this stage, it was very interesting. There's nothing to show you that there's a difference, and actually even today, in the way that child is treated. And maybe today you'll see them wear blue if it's a boy and pink if it's a girl, or something like that. And it's really obvious it's similar, right? So there's very little showing that this is really a boy by the way they're treated or where they are put or where it would be a similar experience for both children. And that Mwanawa Kahe or Mwanawa Kairetu would be tethered to the mother nonstop until they got to a point where there was a second birth. Being born again is not a new concept that came with the Westerners. It is a concept that the Mugikuyu had. And this would be being born of the spirit is really what it is. It's being born where an animal in this case would be a lamb, or actually a grown sheep would be put to death, would be sacrificed, and there would be a few rituals that we're not going to get into, but it was very, very elaborate, that would signify and even show that child being born again. How long did that take? This would be, it varied from ridge to ridge. As we've said before, the Mugikuyu experience was not uniform everywhere.
Okay.
You know, there would be some variations on how long, how many years, but for the most part, it would be within the formative stage of that child. And that child would not be, a sibling would not be born to them or after them before that child hit that stage, which actually, interestingly, served as a very interesting way of family planning, because that child, the mom and the dad cannot hook back up until that ceremony usually is done. And that would be an interesting point, and that would be usually a good place to show that, yep, this child has now been, usually it's a toddler, they're walking, they can carry something, then take it to their father, and that would be the signal that that child is ready for that.
Okay.
And that's not in all Kikuyu. Not all of them. Some of them, you would hear that ceremony wouldn't take place until year 10. So when we are studying Oyekoyo, we have to understand the calendar is not going to be fast and hard or a particular way, but there are concepts that are nonetheless going to be carried through as we go down this list of stages.
King Ori, this is beautiful. So the first stage.
I think I confused everybody, didn't I?
Well, no, you didn't.
Right. So let me kind of whatever this is as a learner, right? So it's more of, we had this first stage, the infant, where the gemis was said, and you did not move on to the next stage until you had your second birth, until you were born again in spirit. And that could be anywhere from 0 to 10 years of age. But you also said something very interesting, which is during that period, the man and the wife did not have intercourse. I mean, that sounds a little bit much.
Yeah. So let me clarify that a little bit. From the time this child is born until this child can literally pick up an object, something like a bowl of uji, and take it to the father, that child's mother and that child's father usually would not be getting ready to have another child. They would usually, that'd be a period of separation. And so there was a lot of celibacy happening in the Kikuyu community because of that kind of setting. But this was an excellent way of family planning, I think. And so you find that most children are 3 years apart or something like that, because that's how long typically it takes for a 2-year-old child to be able to bring you something. And then that says, hey, it's time for another baby.
Wow,
so,
then that really kind of confirms the value or the virtue that Waiyaki talked about last time, which is self-control or self-management.
Temperance, yeah.
Yeah, self-management is very important. Yes, absolutely.
But I'll add something to... Sorry, Ciku. Let me add something onto what King Ori said. So that was made possible because the man had a digira and the woman had a nyoba. The woman's house was a nyoba. The man's house was a digira. So, unlike how we live today, where you have, say, a master bedroom where the husband and wife sleep, when a child was born, they would sleep in the mother's house until that ceremony. And then if it was a boy, then the boy would, after a while, would be able to move to his dad's digira, and then start learning about how to be a boy and start hearing stories of his dad would give him, or the boy's stories of boyhood and warriorhood and history. So that demarcation between the digira and the nyoba would not make it difficult for the man and the woman not to meet sexually until that ceremony happened.
Okay, great. That's a really good point. Ciku, what were you going to add?
Yeah, I was going to add that So now another dimension of what is going on, and this highlights the intersectionality of the various stages of life, is that birth is, we recognize that birth was a lot deeper than the physical child being born, right? There's many ways in which even how a child is conceived, when the spirit of the child is going to enter into the woman and decide that that's the family that is going to go to. So there's a lot of other deeper principles that's happening before the physical manifestation of a child. Also, it highlights that the postpartum period for women is an absolutely sacred time. Now, in Western societies, 6 weeks is like, oh yeah, you should be back in work, working. For us, we knew that simply because a child has been born, the bond between a mother and a child is absolutely crucial. It's crucial for the child as well as it's crucial for the woman. The woman's body needs time to be able to heal. There are different things that the woman is also doing at the various stages, right after you give birth, certain herbs that you're taking, all of this. So for those 2-3 years after the child is born, the woman is also going through a healing process for herself, preparing her body to be fully who she is, preparing now for another child. And also, because now we're talking about a traditional setting, the connection between a mother and child is also very important because the mother is the one that is showing the child how to be human, right?
Yeah.
How this is the way that you talk, this is the way that you eat, this is the way that you use the bathroom. And that takes connection between a mother and child. So potty training is not like how you can potty train now where you put a diaper, right? The child did not have a diaper. So you need to be in tune with your child to be able to know when they're going to urinate, when they're going to defecate. Yeah. So it also had a very practical reason as well as emotional and spiritual. Yes. So it wasn't just family planning, right? It's way bigger than and I know this was not your intent, but I want to highlight that it wasn't just for the sake of spatial between children. Like it was also about the woman getting back into who she is, the entire family coming into who she is. The entire family going into who they are. And also during this time, after a woman gave birth, the woman will then now give the husband, I'm going to use the word permission, I don't know what other word there is, but to take on another wife, right? So the man and this other woman now, this other wife, are also creating their own family. This other woman now is creating her own nyoba. So there's a lot of other things going on within the community. That's not just about the child I want to highlight. You know what I mean? Because when we're going through the different stages, it's connected to other things that's going on.
Ciku, I think that is so beautiful and specifically spoken by a Mudumogo, right? Who comes from 3 generations of midwives, right? And I think what you've highlighted here is the sacredness of birth, in our community. And not just that, but also the sacredness of the bond between the mother and the child, because the mother is the one who develops that child in their formative years, really imbues in them the beauty of humanity as the nurturer, yes. Right? And then you've also talked about the sacredness of the woman and her physical health. Right? Because like you said, sometimes we ignore that. So what I'm taking from this is the beauty, again, of our culture, that everything was purposeful. Everything had a reason behind it. We just didn't do things. But when you uncover the why, when you uncover the reason, what could seem crazy, like me saying, 3 years, right? That takes a lot of self-control. Right? When you uncover all of that, then you realize that there was a purpose behind it. And it's just so stunningly purposeful and intentional. Our ancestors was something to admire. Beautiful. Yes. So at this point, Waiyaki, should we move on to the next stage?
Yeah, let's go into after the child has gone through the second birth. And what I stated in the last podcast is they move from being called mwana wa kahe, which is loosely translated as the boy child, or mwana wa kairetu, to now being given that gender, so being specific to once you're born again, so to speak, kushiarwa na buri, or the second birth, then you become a kahe or kairetu. And so I guess Ciku will go to you to give us more information on the mwana wa kairetu, specifically after that ceremony.
Well, thank you so much for this rich discussion, King Ori. Thank you, Ciku. Thank you, Waiyaki. And let me transition everybody into the next episode, which is episode 9. In this next episode, we will talk more about the life of a man who was a warrior and the life of a woman, right, as part of their stages of life. But this conversation is going to be so delicious for one main reason. When you hear it, what you hear will actually leave you wanting to be transported back to the life that our ancestors lived, so you could experience the vibrancy and enjoyment that our culture had. That's right, I said it. You will want to be transported back to perhaps the 1700s or maybe the 1800s and live the life of a true Mugikuyu. So join us in episode 9. Thank you for listening and being present here with us today. We are grateful. You can find Matire Gemi on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And be sure to follow us. Our website is matire-gemi at simplecast.com. And this podcast was produced by Waiyaki and Njeri Wadiho with sound design by Njengan Gigs. Thanks again, and please share this widely.